And
You gave a date of the next semester. What was that date again, if you don't mind?
21st, Monday the 21st, the week beginning Monday the 21st.
And that is, what's that semester called?
Oh, we're calling it winter. You can have a look on the website.
Oh, the winter. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'll read my clapboard. Plato's Theaetetus, Autumn 2021, Session 6, Justified True Belief. I've actually changed the title. I hope people don't mind. I've changed it for next time, but it's all the same. Okay, so in this week's class, I'll do a brief reflection on last week's very heavy monologue, and then I'll move into a summary of the last two readings. So reading for week 6 and reading for week 7 because, reading for week 5 and 6 because last time I didn't get through to the summary of week 5. So, and then in our discussion, we can grab a glass of wine and have a bit of a wind-up chat. So before I start going through that summary, I want to just do a brief summary of last week's monologue. So last week I stepped back from the text and presented an overview of the philosophical discourse around epistemology because I really felt that we kind of needed this at this point. So I brought it in and I do hope it helps, and I'd be interested on feedback about that, about whether it did help you. I know we did get some last week, but in what ways it did or didn't help you. So remember we started with a consideration of sense experience, where we broke it down into immediate experience and how this corresponds or doesn't to my remembered world. To see this distinction between immediate experience and remembered world clearly, it can help to reflect or meditate on pure immediate experience of particular sensations. For example, sound. And to meditate on them as they appear in themselves, not as by reference to, embodied by, the object that makes the sound. Such particular sensations are often called sense datum. We then talked about truth as an opposite form, true, not false, and how truth involves a preconception of reference. Remember when I talked about hi-fi sound system, high fidelity, reproducing music that is claimed to be true by reference to the original performance. High fidelity or faithfulness or not to the original. This is a kind of truth. Most things we know, that is know in the broad senses, having ideas about, most things that we know have a reference so that they can be said to have a truth value by reference. For example, if I'm retelling the story of Santa, right, or a fairy tale, you can correct me when I get it a bit wrong, true or false, by reference to the myth. In propaganda, including Plato's Noble Lies, remember the Republic? A story can be faithful to the message of the propaganda. It can be on message, promoting the right thoughts or behavior, or not. Likewise, in advertising or promotion, is this statement by Eddie Maguire on message? Is it true to the narrative that we're trying to present about football? True or false? Hired or fired? I didn't mention also that truth by reference can be expressed by implication in logic. If all swans are white and this is a swan, then it can't be black. Or it cannot be a swan. So this is truth or fidelity in the broadest sense. In the narrower philosophical sense, we consider truth value qua epistemology. That is, where we are concerned with true or false knowledge of being, the being of things, their essential being, their ontology. A lot of what we know in the broader sense, has no truth value in this sense. Such is the case for myths. And so in Plato, we find the difference. Famously, Plato makes this difference between mythos and logos. Mythos does not have this sort of truth value. In other words, it's not falsifiable in this sense. That is, there is no way to challenge its truth value in this sense. There is no way to assess it, or it would be silly to do so, except if you're a kid. It's not Santa, it's Daddy. And maybe silly then too, because especially if there's the rule that if you don't believe in Santa, then you don't get any presents. Shh. As for truth qua epistemology, this is Plato's concern in Theaetetus. And we find two main ways to go with the reference. Reference to sensible objects or reference to Plato's forms. Theaetetus is mostly interested in reference to sensible objects, pointing down. In pointing down, the object can be considered to be either only in my experience or ultimately external to my experience. This would be that their ultimate being or ontology is external in a material reality. If their ontology is external to my experience in this way, and so the epistemology is externally referring, then this is what we call materialism. Alternatively, if their being is internal to my experience, and so not absolutely and essentially real in themselves, the objects aren't absolutely and essentially real in themselves, then this is Platonic. Plato points to the absolute reality not in the observed object, but by consideration of the act of observation. This involves the observer, psyche, mind's eye, and immediately known forms, Plato's forms. These forms, which are beyond sense and time, are only expressed in the object, only expressed in the objects of perception. These forms in themselves are the ultimate reality that is only reflected or revealed in our sensible world. So there you go. Do you see what I just did there? I introduced a whole bunch of philosophical terms: sense experience, sense data, truth by reference, epistemological truth, ontology, internal reference, external reference. What does that mean? If you understand all these terms in their context, as I just explained them, well, that's pretty amazing. If you understood some of this summary, then you're making extraordinary progress in your philosophical inquiry. If you didn't follow it at all, but remain keen to continue your philosophical inquiry, then I suggest you go back and listen to the recording of last week, and then come back with some questions. Or otherwise, you can ask those questions now. So before we go to the account of today's reading, of this week's reading and last week's reading, Are there any questions, comments, or reflections?
Bernie, what was, you talked about epistemological truth. Is that correct? Is that how you?
That's right, yeah.
What was after that? Oh, you mentioned.
I think I probably mentioned that there's two ways that can go. One is to the sensible object, which is the pointing down stuff. One is by reference to the forms. So this is where orientated towards where you see being. Okay. So Plato would say ultimately being resides in the forms.
Thank you.
Is that the external and internal reference?
That's right. Exactly. So external means, you remember we said everything I know about the cup is in my senses. My senses are in me. If you then say, well, there is a cup beyond my senses that exists in itself, right? So beyond my cup that I experience, that is real to me, that is here, right, in my experience. There's something beyond that which is unknowable and unknown that's giving me that experience. That's external. That's external reference. That's beyond me in the unknowable, unknown material world. So people use this term reference all the time in philosophy. What is the referent? What are you referring to? And so in semiotics too, you have the sign and the signifier. So the sign signifies the signified, signifier signifies the signified, and the signified is what the sign refers to. So green is the signifier, and what it signifies is stop. That's what it refers to. So it's the referent. Okay, I've stumped you all. All right, well, if you've got any more, we can talk about it over wine. All right, so let me make a run through this section. And in a way, this is like a second half or a whole segment of the dialogue, because this is right where the whole idea that knowledge equals perception, the whole hypothesis knowledge equals perception, is abandoned. And then we go on to this belief or opinion thing. And so a few terms are important here. There is belief or opinion, doxa, and we've discussed this before. And it is a tricky term, but just remember its other kind of translations or connotations as judgment. For example, that's probably a big one. You know, I make a judgment. I have an opinion, I have a judgment. You know, there's a sense in which it's kind of active and you've made a choice there. Or belief. So opinion, belief, judgment. Okay, doxa. And then there's false. It's pretty straightforward, pseudo. And then there's logos. Logos becomes very important right at the end here when we say sometimes modern philosophy says justified true belief. So you justify it through giving a logos. Okay, so we'll get onto that. So there's some of the key terms. Another comment to make about the reading is sometimes Plato is arguing against a prevailing view that seems, in Plato's account of it anyway, to be not very persuasive and sometimes rather silly. This would suggest that we should not bother with it. And I have been thinking about whether we should not bother with some of this stuff, and next time we run it, make the reading a bit narrower. But there's one advantage in reading this stuff, is it gets us to think in a way that Plato is thinking when he gets to the Sophist. And so it makes it easy for us to read the Sophist and to read the Sophist and this stuff as an engagement with Parmenides and with the dialogue, the Parmenides, where issues come up and ways of thinking come up that are then resolved in the Sophists. So there is some benefit in all your suffering. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the reading from the end of week 4, there was the abandonment of the hypothesis that knowledge is perception. This was abandoned in the recognition that important judgments about sense experience are undertaken independent from their immediate experience in the sense organs. Important assessments such as the very being of the thing experienced. You know, was it an illusion or was it real? Those sorts of things. Making assessments about your immediate experience, your primary experience. This is actually perhaps where knowledge resides. So it's flipping right away from perception. We come to consider that perhaps knowledge qua knowledge of being is not in perception at all, but that it is found in our thinking about perception. So it is in thinking, but not all our thinking, because one can have false beliefs. So it must be true beliefs. So we have this new hypothesis that knowledge is true belief. And at page 187c, Socrates applauds Theaetetus for having a go, saying that only by having a go can we progress. We might get to the answer, we might not. But even if we don't get to the answer, at least we won't think we know what we don't know. Remember the apology. At 187d, the question comes up, a very important question here, and right through the Sophist. What is false belief? Now, if there is true belief, then there must be its opposite also lurking around. As for all forms, remember, piety, impiety, justice, injustice, beauty, ugliness, we can't define the one without the other. So with truth, it must be defined in terms of its opposite, false. First, they must be, false, first Plato and Theaetetus must try to align, make an alignment where true belief is belief about what is known, false belief is belief about what is not known. So this is the first alignment where you've got true belief, known, aligned with what's known, false belief aligned with what's known. But does it make sense that I can have a belief about what I don't know? At 188b, he says, if true belief is knowledge, then false can't be mistaken knowledge for unknown for what, for the unknown for what is known, and the and known for what is unknown. Okay, sorry, I got that a bit confused. False belief can't involve what is not known because what is not known is not known. It's as though Theaetetus could mistake a dog for a kangaroo, but he can't because he doesn't know a kangaroo. Or Theaetetus mistakes a wallaby for a kangaroo, but he can't because he doesn't know either. So false belief can't involve what is not known. So then they shift on to ontology. And bear with us here, not because the argument is particularly pertinent or powerful, but because it gets us into the way of thinking that comes up in the Sophists. False belief could be believing what is not false belief could be believing what is not about something. This would be like believing that Bernie's cup is green. I think Bernie's cup is green is a false belief. And indeed, Socrates asks us to consider this hypothesis in terms of sense perception, that of sight, and so how I might have a false visual perception. The translation is difficult here, but actually the original Greek is more philosophical. When I see something, I see one thing. I see one. Think of this in a way I have been talking about making distinctions. Every distinction I make is one, and every one has its other, island and sea. So if I say that I see what is not when I see green, I am saying that green is not. But green is. The green I see, if I see it as one, as a distinction. So how can I say that I see what is not? Likewise, if I think Bernie's cup is green, then I think what is not. A green cup is not. But yet, green cup is something that is, or is nothing at all. But the object of a belief must be something. It must be one thing. False belief is saying that one being is not one being or none. Not one thing is no thing. Not one is none. Bernie's green cup is not in this case. It does not exist in this case because Bernie's cup is not green. If green cup is not, then it is none. It is non-being. It does not exist. So how can you have a belief about nothing? It must be a belief. To be a belief, it must be a belief about something. A belief about nothing is no belief at all. So believing what is not can't be what false belief is. Is your head exploding? This can seem like logic chopping, and it is. But we shall see how it is helpful in understanding how Plato leverages Parmenidean skepticism to achieve a positive result in the Sophist. So stay calm. Compare this with the Sophist, where there's a slightly more helpful example, I think. There's, in terms of the statement about Theaetetus, who is in fact sitting, and the statement is, Theaetetus is flying. Here it is proposed that the false belief is aligned with the falsity of a flying Theaetetus. But Theaetetus is not flying, he's sitting. So how can this be what a false belief is about? Theaetetus flying doesn't exist. How can false belief be about something that doesn't exist? So the alignment of knowledge, not knowledge, with being, not being. Knowledge is knowledge of being, not knowledge is of not being. This alignment has failed. So, false belief as believing in what is unknown or what is not has failed. Now they consider where two things that are in mind are confused with one another. So one translation calls this cross belief, I think, or sometimes people call this cross belief. So false belief is of something that is, but it's the wrong thing. At 189a, Theaetetus says, that's it, you got it. And this is where Maria gets on alert because she knows it must be wrong. Like confusing the ugly for the beautiful, that is truly false belief. Socrates, truly false? Really, Theaetetus? Like, this bag is heavily light? Like, something can be becoming opposite to itself. It's a joke of language here that Plato makes, right? Makes Socrates making, where there is clearly a linguistic contradiction, but notice it's just a joke because we're trying to go below language. But then at 189e, and Maria brought this up last week, there's a definition of thought. That it is the discourse of the mind with itself. And this is where logos starts to come in and be important. Here, thought is closely aligned with discussing out loud. And this brings on a new definition of belief when, which is when private discourse reaches a conclusion, that is a belief or a judgment, whatever. It's more like a judgment then, isn't it? You know, you have a private discourse, let me work this out, and then you come to a judgment. Now, that's the definition. You know, I immediately think about that. Well, what about unconscious beliefs and preconceptions and unthinking and unreflecting beliefs? And I ask the psychologists in our audience, what would Freud say? Okay, but anyway, it's an outcome of this private discourse. That's what belief is in this definition. But what does this mean for the difference between belief that is true and belief that is false? You convince yourself that one thing that is known is another thing that is known. But if you know both, then you could never confuse one with the other. The example given, if you really know odd, odd numbers, odd, and you really know even, could you ever imagine confusing odd with even? If you know one of them, then you could never confuse it with what you don't know. Theaetetus could never confuse a cow with a wombat. He doesn't know wombats. At 191b, we come to, but it might be like when you see a person coming in the distance and you think it's Socrates, but when they get closer, you see that you're mistaken, and in fact, it's a stranger. This is a case where we can say that I don't know something that I know. I don't know Socrates, but I do, I don't know Socrates, but I do know Socrates. Don't know and you do know. So what's going on here? It feels again a bit like logic topping, and it is, but notice how it brings us up to what we've been talking about the relationship between immediate experience, a correspondence or not, relationship between immediate experience and our remembered world, right? You have the immediate experience and you think it's Socrates, and then, and it's not. And it introduces the metaphor of memory as a wax writing board. And a wax writing board would have been what Plato was writing on when he wrote this. The tablet is blank when we're born, and we learn by writing symbols on it. Forgetting is erasing. The tablets vary between us. Some are soft, easy to remember. Some are hard. It's hard to forget, but it's often hard to remember. We're all different. And writing varies. Sometimes it's clearly laid out, highly organized mind, or confused, all written on top of each other. The analogy works for comparing clever people with not so clever people. And this is continued below this section at 194e. But back in this section, there is a correspondence between what is in the immediate sensation, what you immediately see, and your memory, the wax. Socrates now says that they were wrong earlier to say that confusing the known with the known and the unknown with the known, so confusing the known with the known and the unknown with the known, were impossible. That was wrong. That's wrong, that earlier conclusion. And then he goes through a whole series of possibilities to see whether false belief is possible. Now, if you've read this, if you like, some people might have read this in the Loeb edition. It's not as easy to read as in the Penguin, because in the Penguin edition, numbers are inserted for each case, and then A's and B's for the different cases. Well, let me just say, what I suggest you do is replace, if you're reading the Penguin, replace the A with Socrates and the B with Theaetetus, and imagine it as these two people approaching, or one person approaching. Okay. For example, I think it's the first one. Socrates is known, but not being perceived, and Theaetetus is known, but not being perceived. So in this case, they can't be confused. Indeed, there can be no confusion between Socrates and Theaetetus if you know one of them, or you do not know either of them. Well, it makes sense. So he goes through all these combos and then finds cases where there is possible confusion, where you might have false belief. Important here is that you can perceive for the first time what you don't know as different from what you knew. And so you learn. Your world changes. There's new marks in the wax. Now, at page 193, Theaetetus declares once again, Socrates, you're right. This is marvelous. We've nailed false belief. At 195c, though, Socrates points out that we have only covered truth by correspondence with sense perception. What about correspondence of one thought with another? What about when I add 5 to 7 and I get 11? Oh, it should be 12. I get 11. Mental arithmetic, especially higher numbers, can go wrong. So this is a false belief that is not false by correspondence with perception. Something known is confused with something else that is known, e.g. 12 with 11. Both are known. But we said before that that is impossible, because if 11 is a false belief in this case, then it is known and not known at the same time. But not known is not being, which is nothing. This example of error in mental arithmetic suggests that false belief is not just cross-matching memory thought with perception, but also cross-matching in thought, where the known, 11, is falsely known to be the same as 5 and 7. This brings us to the Avery analogy. And by the way, this brings us into the domain, and we can discuss this if people like in the discussion of Kant's famous term, synthetic a priori. Synthetic a priori knowledge. Okay, so in the Avery analogy, we're going to that now. At 196d, to get out of the conundrum, we get a distinction in knowledge of having and possessing. It's like possessing lots of birds that are captured and held in an aviary, where having a bird is holding it in your hand. The trouble is, the birds in the aviary are hard to catch, and sometimes you catch the wrong bird. That's what happened with 5 and 7 is 11. You caught 11, but it was the wrong bird. You should have caught 12. But how do we interpret recapturing having in this analogy? Consider an arithmetician, not an advanced one, maybe primary school. She knows how to count the odd and even numbers. In this sense, she knows the whole number series, and she can teach others. She's got arithmetic in the bag, in the cage. But what about when she sets to count something or mentally count? You know, you're counting some things, you're counting sheep, or you're just mentally counting. Is she relearning what she already knows? Socrates is trying to work out exactly how we should see recollection of what we already know. The problem is that ignorance or error is not due to not knowing, but to knowing. The problem here is that ignorance or error is not due to not knowing, it's due to knowing. You already know it. And yet you have an error, it's due to that. In theory, this could mean that you have lots of birds, you have encyclopedic knowledge, but you know nothing because you're always mismatching. Theaetetus suggests a modification to the metaphor. There are ignorances or errors as well as knowledge in the cage. So you've got this cage and you've got all these captured birds. Some of them are errors and some of them are true. Is that a way out? But then there's no way of knowing what is an error and what is true, because would you have put it in the cage believing it was false? No, you would put it in believing it was true. It does not solve the problem, but only loses the distinction between truth and knowledge altogether. So it didn't turn out to be a good suggestion. The final problem with true belief as knowledge comes in consideration of rhetorical persuasion. The lawyer does not teach, but persuades. Consider a court case where a jury is persuaded to the truth that a robbery was committed. Actually, the robbery was committed. But the jury can never know that because they weren't there. So the jury has true belief the robbery was committed and they were persuaded to it. But the jury doesn't know it. The juror doesn't know it because she was not there. Now, just take any court case recently. George Pell, right? Maybe the jury had true belief that he committed the crime, right? But they don't really know because they weren't there, right? So they were persuaded, but they don't really know. And this is really interesting here in the history of jurisprudence and the history of skepticism in philosophy, because beyond reasonable doubt, that term that's used in jurisprudence comes from the skeptical crisis in 16th century Catholic philosophy. Okay, so now we move to the reading for this week. And a new hypothesis is introduced as a dream. The reason for introducing it as a dream may be, people believe, for narrative purposes. We've seen things like this before, because it might be the restatement of a well-known position in Plato's time, but a position that became known or was coined after Socrates' death. So by putting it back into the narrative to make it believable that Socrates could challenge this position, it had to be, oh, I got it in a dream. Okay. So we don't really know who held this view. It's interesting in itself, but it feels a bit strange. So this is where knowledge is true judgment accompanied by a rational explanation. This is where we come to logos. Okay. Logos becomes an important thing on top. Okay. The theory states that in this theory anyway, the primary element of knowledge admits no explanation but can only be named. it cannot admit any predication, right? It can't say anything about it, give it any characteristics. You can't even say that these primary elements, call it X, that X exists. Right? The elements would then be true, but be beyond knowledge. So you have these primary elements, right, that are true, but they're beyond knowledge. They're kind of below knowledge. Knowledge only comes after when a reasonable account is made. This account, or logos, is defined as the weaving together of names with linguistic expressions, verbs and things, okay? So you can name these elementary things, but you can't have predicates, you can't say anything about them. But only when you weave the names together in linguistic, sentences and stuff, do you give an account, and that is knowledge. So this is the dream theory, okay? The discussion shifts to letters and syllables naturally in the Greek. It's not clear to us, but it's natural in the Greek because the word for letter and element is the same. So the word the elements of geometry for Euclid it's the same word as the word for letter. And the word for syllable is like a word for combination. So, so the letters are the elements, and then there's the combination, which is analogous with the logos, okay, which is the level of knowledge. So the syllables stand in this case for the logos, for what is knowledge, and the letters are not knowledge. So that's what it's stating. So it starts with the example of the first syllable in Socrates' name, so, right, so. The outcome of the discussion is that if the syllable is the sum of the parts, then if you know the syllable, then you know the letters also. But there's the other option that the syllable is something over and above the sum of the parts. It's kind of like something new. So, and so they consider that also. If in fact the elements, whether letters or notes. So if it's something new, that's right, I need to say that. If it's something new, then it's also an element like the letters. So you're not really getting this element knowledge relationship working. That's the claim. In fact, the elements, whether letters or notes as in music, are most important to know, according to Socrates. It's silly to say that elements are unknowable. Okay, so now we're coming to the conclusion of the discussion. Here Socrates gives 3 tries at a definition of what this logos is. This rational explanation that could bring the true belief up to this new level that we call knowledge. Remember, we started knowledge, the definition, the hypothesis. Knowledge is justified or rationalized or reasoned true belief. Okay. So what is this logos that's going to be able to bring it up to knowledge? So the first one he tries is, well, it's making thoughts clear through speech, like explaining what you're talking about, right? Okay. But this isn't special. Everyone can give a clear account. Well, most people can, of their beliefs. Like, consider, like, the lunar landing, right? It was staged in a Hollywood backlot. I can give you a clear account of that, how the lunar landing was faked in a Hollywood backlot. But that doesn't make it knowledge. It doesn't make it any different from the true belief, lifting it up to knowledge. So there's no distinction here between right opinion or judgment and knowledge. Now, the second one he tries is it's this logos is a complete enumeration of all the component parts. Hesiod said that 100 pieces make a wagon. Does that mean that I don't know a wagon when I can only name a few of them? And even if I can name the components, like say the syllables in Theaetetus' name, does that necessarily mean that I know them? Because it might be just a guess or a fluke, or I might have just learned it. Finally, true judgment becomes knowledge when your logos gives the distinguishing characteristics. But you can't have knowledge. You can't have true judgment. Think about true judgment, right? You can't have true judgment without knowing the distinguishing characteristics already. Right? You know, if you're talking about the true judgment at Theaetetus' face, right? You have to know the distinguishing characteristics. It's Theaetetus' face, right? To have a true judgment. So there's no distinction between that and knowledge. So in these three different ways of considering this addition of a logos, they found no way to see how it takes you up to knowledge. Well, Theaetetus, is there nothing else? No. And I'll just read the last bit here. And does our midwifery declare that everything we produced was stillborn and that there was nothing worth keeping? Absolutely. Well, Theaetetus, if you set out at a later date to conceive more ideas and you succeed, the ideas with which you'll be pregnant will be better because of this inquiry of ours. And even if you don't get pregnant, you'll be easier to get on with because you won't make a nuisance of yourself by thinking that you know what you don't know. This self-responsibility is all my skill is capable of giving, nothing more. I have none of the knowledge and the skill that other people have, the important and remarkable people of our own time and in the past. I have none of that. But God granted my mother and me our skill as midwives, she to attend women, I to attend young and honest men, and anyone who's good looking. Anyway, now I have an appointment at the King's Porch to face the indictment which Meletius has brought against me. But let's meet here again tomorrow, Theodorus. So ends Theaetetus, and so starts the Sophist. And I beat the clock. I went straight through there, guys. I hope you followed. But I think people really wanted to get a bit of an account of the whole thing, and so I hope that did help because you suffered by reading it, and so it was my duty to to try to explain it.
You know, Bernie, there was one. Oh, sorry. Are you taking questions or comments? Oh, okay, great. So there was one.
Well, Jackie, hold on to it.
Okay.
Why don't you hold on to it? Why don't we go and grab our glasses of wine?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, hold on to it. I'm going to grab my glass of wine and come back, and then we'll go for it. Okay.
mind-blowing. It's so interesting.
I agree with you. Is that Mary? That's Mary. No, that's Maria.
Last week, I was literally pulling my hair out because I was very, what does he mean? What does it mean here? It's not, it is. No, it's not. It's not, it is, and all those combinations. And but little by little, the more you read it, the more you absorb, and thank God for Bernie's explanations.
Yes.
Something sinks, and you start, oh yeah, okay, yes, I can see that.
It's so fun. It's like little pebbles across a stream.
Yeah.
I imagine it, right? It's like there's this stream and you just look at it and you just go, there is no way I'm going to get to the other end. But all of a sudden, the little pebbles start appearing out of the water, and you can step on one, and then you can step on another, and then you step in the water and you go, no, just don't get it. And then you step on another one, but somehow you make it across the stream.
But now you reminded me of Harry Potter and those those staircases that they come and the change course, all right? Because that's exactly what he is at the moment where, okay, I can follow this. He discards it. No, you can't do this.
Reminds me of.
Well, cheers, everybody.
Oh, yeah, okay. What will we toast? Will we toast Plato, you bastard?
Yes, here's to Plato.
You
and-
bastard.
And here's to more and more of him and more.
Ah.
Yes, more of it. Yeah, looking forward to the Sophist.
Yeah. The first part of the Sophist, the first four classes, readings on the Sophist. I think, where's Andrew? Is he still here with us? Are quite relatively easy. It's just the last two sessions, so you can be sick then if you wanted to.
And where does the statesman fit?
Oh, well, it continues with
the afterwards.
Yeah, it's after that. Yeah, but it's not as interesting. It is. It has its interests. Yeah.
So Bernie, there was a time there when you were talking about the beliefs and the false beliefs, and I'm sitting here like trying to get my head straight. And then I thought, well, if false belief cannot, I just wrote this down so I don't forget it. If false belief cannot be what is not known, then can false belief exist at all? But then he went on to explain about the 7 plus 5 being 11, right? As opposed to being 12. And so that's actually what he means, right? About false belief. Is it error? But really the 12 is known and the 11 is known as well, right? So at the end of the day, neither is wrong. It's just that one is a false belief. Have I understood? Am I starting to?
Yeah, you really have. Yeah, that's right. That's what he's playing with there. Yeah. So it's like, you're drawing away and saying, well, I mean, there's two levels of knowledge there, isn't there? And one of them, in a way, is called recollection, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so he's dealing with all that. And in a way, really, what it does is it brings awareness to all these things. It's kind of like when I, did last week, we didn't do the reading. I kind of drew all those things out. This sometimes tortuous discourse, dialogue, is bringing out awareness of these various different things, I think. But yeah, that's pretty much right. So the first one is, of course, between your memory and perceptions, immediate perceptions, and then the second one is between thoughts and thoughts, or thoughts and memories, or whatever else. So kind of one's internal and one's kind of thoughts with thoughts, or memory with memory, or memory with thoughts. And the other one is with immediate perceptions. That's what he starts with.
Yes.
And then in that he talks about a correspondence between with knowledge and knowing and not knowing, and then with being and not being. So he plays with knowing and not knowing, and he plays with the correspondence that true belief is belief about what's known, and false belief is belief about what's not known. And then true belief is belief about what is, and false belief is belief about what is not.
Mhm.
And showing how absurd that is, like this, and it comes up in the Sophist. I think it's a good one. Theaetetus is sitting there, and the statement is Theaetetus is flying. Well, Theaetetus' flying doesn't exist. So how can you have a false belief be a belief about something that doesn't exist? It must be something else. Yeah.
You know, Bernie, you talk about it being tortuous, and I think it's part of a process that tended to exercise and skill the brain to be able to get to that logos and that logic, and if you don't exercise in that way, if you don't drill down and pull apart and get to the basics, you won't be able to achieve that. I think that's part of the process. And there are lots of messages there. One of the ones that you mentioned somewhere tonight was about, I can't remember exactly, but it was about, and it appeared in last week's reading, about people not using language exactly, and the play on the words and stuff is about using language exactly. You know, do we use it precisely is the word I'm looking for, not exactly. You know, the way we speak sometimes is very imprecise, and we end up with those strange beliefs or errors or misunderstandings and things like that. But I think the dialogue process is about exercising.
Exercising the mind to bring you to an awareness of the problems and so on. Yeah. So there's a double game, or there can be potential confusion here with Plato's position, and it comes back to a book I've got on the shelf here, The History of Rationalism. And then Plato is the first rationalist. And he's not a rationalist in the sense of saying that that language or linguistics can bring truth. It can point you to the truth. So Theaetetus can say, "Oh, that's truly false," and then Socrates can have a good laugh about it. "Oh, it's truly false." It's sort of like saying something's heavily light, But I'll let that one go, because he's not being a stickler about the words. He's actually realizing that, and this stuff about saying, "Oh, look, if we were really thorough here, if we were a really good arguer or something, anti-logos, logikos or whatever it's called, if we were a good arguer, then we wouldn't allow ourselves to use the word known or knowledge before we defined it, and yet we are." And so how does that work? Well, it's because we're using the language to point to something that's beyond the language.
Sounds to me like you're describing an equation. Does an equation help explain the point?
Say that again, Hugh.
Your discussion earlier sounded to me like you were describing an equation, or an equation could describe the steps in logic.
So is this the particular equation, like 5 + 7 equals?
No, it was if something's known is true, if that bit seemed like a bit of programming to me.
Yes, It does seem a bit like programming, doesn't it?
Like
Yeah.
I
statistics.
thought that, sorry.
Sorry, like statistics, you know, that you have to follow that steps. Sorry, Jackie, or whoever it was.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like that. Well, yeah, like trying to be logically thorough. I mean, when I got to that section that has the A's and B's and the 17 different ones, I did a little table, you know, and it worked quite well. I put true and false in every column and said, oh yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. Oh, and there's these categories that don't. I think, yeah, well, that was kind of fun. But you know, actually, did I really need to bother doing all that? I don't know. Depends on your attitude. I suppose certain types of people really enjoy that. I enjoyed it moderately, but you could pass it by.
I actually agree with you, Hume. I was thinking along the same lines at one point, and I kind of started to go, it does sound like one of those equations. It actually reminded me of one that you put on the board yesterday, the 1 + 1, and then the +1 + 1, and then the +1 + 1. And I'm like, that actually sounds like I'm starting to, I'm not quite there, but I'm getting that there's this spiral thing happening, and there's this infinity thing happening, and then there's these numbers. And so I kind of was on the same track as Hume then. And, that's what I was thinking as well, similar to that.
Also reminded me of Donald Rumsfeld. I think it was during the period of the WMDs when he was talking about the known unknowns, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknowns, unknown unknowns.
Yes,
he get himself out of a pickle.
Do people remember that? Does anyone remember that?
No.
Yeah. No. Well, what happened was, and it actually doesn't come from him. I looked it up at the time. I thought it was quite interesting, and it does come from someone else. But he was sort of talking about, I think it was the Iraq War was going badly, and someone said, well, you know, someone said something about, oh well, there's risks or something, and he said, well, you know, there's, if you like, the known risks, the known knowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns. So the totally unexpected, like, you know, you can say there's, you know, there's a risk of my house burning down or something, but there's things that just come completely out of the blue that you haven't thought about.
They're the things you don't know, you don't know.
They're the things you don't know, you don't know. So
he obviously convinced everyone that he knew what he was talking about.
he didn't convince everyone, but I thought it was actually, when I heard it, I mean, you know, I didn't like the guy. I didn't like where he was coming from, but I actually thought the statement was quite good.
Yeah,
in terms of assessment of risk. Yeah.
So did you?
The statesman.
Did you identify where it came from, Bernie? Where he?
I can't remember now. Like, this is about 15 years ago, remember? Donald Rumsfeld's a long time ago. No, I can't remember where it came from. But it's discussion of risk and discussion of, like, you know, terms of, like, about the future, how you can work out what's, you know, what's going to happen and what isn't going to happen. You know, it's that sort of futurist talk in those terms. There used to be this profession called futurists. Are they still around? I used to know one. They're very strange people because they always get it wrong, of course. What's that, Hume?
They've all shifted to a multifunctional polis somewhere.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I haven't heard that term for a while. Yeah. So we were talking before the class started about maybe setting the reading next time we did this, just yet setting shorter readings, sections that are particularly pertinent, and then giving an account in the previous week up to that point. And then the class just reads quite a shorter reading, and that, you know, you could read the whole book if you want to, but that might be a better way of approaching it. Would most people agree with that?
I don't know. I quite enjoyed the whole having everything in context. Whereas I think if I were to read it in chunks, I think I probably would be more confused. That's my opinion, Bernie. But yeah, I'd be curious to know about others too.
Yeah, I like to read the whole thing. I find that you're setting, sections, and that's fine, because sometimes, that's how much you manage to read in the week. But ideally, I do like to read the whole thing.
I do quite like your summaries, Bernie, though, before, the before and after. I think that does help to put it all into context.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, that's good feedback. I mean, of course, you've
we
always
can
got
always
the choice.
go and read the entire book. I read it too, but it's, if you set up sections, then these are the things that we can focus on, and then go back and reread and put it all in context.
Mm.
I quite like the format that we have. That suits me. I've got no complaints about the length of the reading each week or anything like that.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear. I'm just impressed with this group. Of course, you are the elite group, you guys. No, you are. I mean,
I find
really.
that quite amusing, Bernie.
No, you are the elite group. Like this is quite advanced stuff. I mean, the terminology that we've started to use already here, and like the it's getting very conceptual, the discussion, and so it's yeah, I'm just really impressed. I mean, it took me a lot longer to get into this than if you guys are in fact beginners, and you're not, in fact, you're not hiding the fact that you've been doing this for 20 years or something. It's very impressive.
Helen's just, do you think we sound like we're out of a cave?
What's Helen saying?
Do you think we're out of the cave?
We're out of the cave.
Out of the cave. You're out of the cave, guys. Yeah.
I like
I was watching a Jane Austen on TV, Sanditon. Has anyone?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, like a nice Toby. And did anyone see anyone who watched it see the Heraclitus reference? I think
No.
yeah. Oh well, you missed it. So the hero, he's kind of like a Mr. Darcy type, is getting into the boat, and he's just they kind of just started courting the heroine, and he quotes Heraclitus, and he says, you never step into the same river twice. Did anyone see this?
No.
No.
Are you
Okay.
watching it? Are you watching it on iView or something, Bernie?
Yeah, it was on iView. Yeah.
Oh no,
What was it?
I watched the first episode on the ABC, but I do love Jane Austen, but I have to say she's very Aristotelian. She's very Aristotelian.
Well, that's interesting. That's a discussion. Yeah. I wonder if it's in the book. Apparently the book wasn't finished, but anyway, yeah. And she responds, she says, because you're not the same. You never step into a river twice because you're not the same person, and the river's not the same river, which is a fragment. That's a fragment of Heraclitus, which is relevant to our discussion. And it does remind me, actually, because I don't think I gave it justice when we covered it, where there was that stuff about the stone is white and the white is changing to not being white. And I think that's just too obscure. So I came across another example, which is often used with the statement that this is all about making statements about the sensible world, sensible objects. So think about the statement like, it's raining, right? So I might go downstairs and, you know, have a ciggy and say, oh, it come upstairs and say, it's raining, right? It's raining. But when I make that statement, maybe it stopped raining. And maybe even when I'm outside and I say it's raining, right? It might stop raining while I'm even saying it. Okay, so that's probably a better way to think about this thing, that the sensible world is always in a state of changing. And Heraclitus, Plato picked up from Heraclitus that, of course, but he had a different conclusion, right? Heraclitus, or the Heraclitians, moved towards a skepticism. Well, you can't say anything about anything because everything is changing all the time. And then, you know, of course, Plato in another direction said, well, sensible experience, the objects in the world are changing all the time. That's becoming, that's not being. So I hope that helps with that Heraclitian section.
Yeah, I think that's really profound. What you know, at a time when there were, you know, this to conceive the idea that everything, all the entities with the ever changing and never remain still, when there are no microscopes and no magnifying glasses, to actually have conceived that that fact, which is actually
No, I agree, Cooler. I think that's totally impressive, because you just look at a stone, you know, you imagine being back there 2,400 years ago, just out of the Stone Age sort of thing with no microscopes or anything. You say, well, a stone isn't really changing. Yeah. It's just sitting there. It's not changing. Some things are changing. The plants are changing, but a stone, no.
Yeah. And also to also even have a concept of the atom at that time, to have a, you know, that's quite profound.
Mm.
Mm.
So they understood that there was more than what their senses perceived.
I beg your pardon?
They understood innately that there was more there than what their senses actually perceived. They saw with their eyes and senses.
But I think they sort of somehow calculated it or worked it out.
Yes, how exactly did they work it out? Of course, we do know that atom is, if you like, an important philosophical concept, right? So it's like a concept that is associated with materialism. So you can get this materialism where you think that fundamental reality, that what's material about everything, is this underlying stuff like a wax. You know, you get this in Descartes. You also get this a bit in Aristotle. But with Democritus and with the atomists, atom means can't be cut, right? So in principle, you can get down to something that can't be cut, right? And so the way we use atom now is wrong in that sense, because we famously cut the atom in 1938 or whenever it was. So it can be cut, and it keeps getting cut, and it keeps getting cut, and it keeps getting cut. And the myth or dogma of the atom has kind of disappeared for a lot of people. So people like Paul Davis, the guy in Adelaide, what's his name? Paul Davies, you know, writes a book, The Matter Myth, or whatever. Although some people and some funding bodies still think you're going to get down to that fundamental particle or set of particles that are going to build all your physics on from that. So that's one particular way of viewing it, which is associated to the pointing down philosophy.
But you know, even at that point, the atom was, you know, in 1938, the atom was actually viewed, but it wasn't, it hadn't been split. So it was still a fact. It was still a fact right up until then that it couldn't be. It was only at that time that the atom was actually split, and that was sort of a scientific breakthrough.
That's right, and so that really did shatter some views. But we should also mention, Kula, that at that point there were considered to be subatomic particles in a plum pudding sort of, way, that there were electrons, and so they're subatomic particles. So there was something smaller, more elementary than the atom. So
yeah. They knew of the existence of all the particles of the atom, but they hadn't split it.
No, that's right. So technically it was the atom, the uncut, the element. Oh, well, okay. I can mention about Kant's synthetic a priori. People interested in that. So we're kind of already connecting. You guys, if you now start taking a philosophy course or do some post-enlightenment philosophy, you'll be able to, just give you a few words, I've given you most of them, you will be able to connect with that discussion now. You'll disagree with it, I hope, but you'll connect with it. So like a priori is kind of, it's just generally this idea that there's posteriori knowledge that you get from experience, right? And then there's a priori knowledge is kind of things you already know, or you know without having to have experience. So you do think of fundamental mathematical or logical concepts or something, things that are at the basis of the formal sciences. So formal sciences being geometry, arithmetic, and logic. But Kant introduced this in-between term, which he called some synthetic a priori, which is kind of things that you work out, you synthesize, you work out from the formal things that you know, but not necessarily, again, by reference to experience. So depending on what school you're in, you'd play that in different ways, but that's the general idea. So 5 + 7 = 12 is an example of synthetic a priori, which I think Kant uses, or something very similar.
How is that spelt, a priori?
Oh, so it's two words. It's a on its own, and then as in priority, priori. So unfortunately, it is a Latin term. I'm not sure if it comes from any Greek, but it is a Latin term.
Priori. What's the
Well,
translation?
Well,
Danny?
priorismos.
What
What
is
is
it?
the word priorismos?
No, priorismos it means destination.
What does a priori translate as?
Something which is worked out, I think.
Is it? Yeah, thanks, Hugh.
Calculated, deduced on its own.
Deduced by its own.
You can figure out with a pen and a piece of paper.
It's kind of like a sense of before and after, isn't it? Hume,
I thought it was like first principles.
Yeah. It's that's the definition, but I think posteriori, the opposite to it is, I think I left a syllable out there. I'm sorry where it is. You can immediately look it up. If you look up a priori, I could do it now, you'll find a posteriori as well. So that's after and before. There's a sense of after and before, I think. Yeah.
So when Plato was taught in the academy in Athens, was there a particular way that the books followed? Like, what did he start off with initially? Is there any details in that regard?
When he was taught, did you say?
When he was teaching.
Oh, when he was teaching.
Yeah. Do we know how he taught the books?
No, we don't. We don't know very much. No, we know he set up the academy. We know they did. They taught geometry and did geometric research, and then we know the dialogues exist, and we we get a sense that the dialogues are exoteric, you know, for popular reading, but the teaching in the academy were secret. And so there's this Aristotle brings up this idea of the, this term, the unwritten teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so there's a lot of talk about, is this what we want to talk about? I'll shut me up if you don't want to talk about this, the unwritten teachings. And so through Aristotle and beyond, in the early fragments we have beyond that, we get this completely different picture and language. Well, not completely different, but this different picture and language of Platonism that is believed to come out of the esoteric teachings of Plato, the so-called unwritten teachings. And people have written books about this, and it then comes up in what's called middle Platonism. Of course, it comes up in academic Platonism. So we've got fragments from academic Platonism, like what's it called? The Epicure. I've forgotten the name. Anyway, we've got fragments of writings in Middle Platonism and academic Platonism, but they're very fragmentary. And so we don't know a lot about what was taught at the academy, just what Aristotle tells us and what these fragments tell us.
The sequence in which the books were written is known, right? So would that reflect the sequence in which they're taught?
Well, perhaps, yeah. So there is this. I think everyone agrees. I have heard people that don't agree, but most people agree that there is a broad sequence of publication, which we certainly ascribe to when I talk about it. And so in that you can perhaps see a course of teaching, but you also see, to a certain extent, and I don't think this should be exaggerated, and a lot of people agree with that, a development in Plato's ideas.
A lot of secrecy going on in the past. I'm sure there's some in the present as well, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to consider why that was there. You know, there are certain reasons that are commendable and understandable, but there's other reasons that sort of seem a bit strange. You know, why they have to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Power. Yeah, no, that's right. Certainly true. Yeah.
Or at least perception of it.
Oh, definitely true. Yeah. Secrecy gave you power, or gave your organization power by having this secret knowledge, for sure.
But sometimes ignorance is bliss as well.
That's true. But there is another reason, and you can kind of get it with this now. You could imagine if you go on with Plato, or even the stage we've got to now, some of the things that we say now would seem ridiculous to someone who doesn't know anything about Platonism. And it would seem like you're a bit crazy. One, it seemed like you're a bit crazy. And two, and maybe we are, and two, it wouldn't be very helpful.
Fair call.
What was that, Hume?
Fair call.
But even it shows that Socrates was persecuted for some of his ideas, so maybe they were concerned about that as well. They didn't want to be targets. So,
offending the gods, lack of piety.
Well, yes, like stealing the fire from the gods.
Stealing the fire. That's right.
Maybe only the gods were supposed to know these very secret equations, these very special equations.
So,
yes.
Did they believe in the pantheon of the gods, or were they more monotheist? Because it seems to me that Plato is talking about one being more than a pantheon of gods.
But then when he talks,
is that right, Bernie? Or sorry, Kula, I interrupted you.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that that we can see it, that Plato in this tradition, we're not talking about Zoroastrianism in Persia, we're talking about in this tradition, it was Plato that introduced monotheism.
Mm.
It was Plato. And so if it was Plato that did that, how does that challenge? Because he moved to this idea of what theos is, what God is in the singular and the plural, but what godliness is or what divinity is, which is very different from saying that divinity is this bunch of characters up on Mount Olympus, you know.
Yeah, that's actually what initially I thought. Initially, I was actually going like down that. I didn't quite know how to express it the way you did, Bernie, but that was the first thing I thought of as well. Particularly religiously, I kind of thought, wow, that was a huge thing to come out, and I mean that was contrary to anything that the Greeks, or in fact certainly the Greeks, but that the world really had ever known. So that's certainly something. I mean, carrying on what Mary was saying as well, that protection, that protective spirit, I'm guessing, would have to have been something that they needed to care for themselves.
There were some other monoatheists, like there was it Akhenaten in Egypt that was
Yes, Akhenaten.
he was the monoatheist, the Zoroastrians. There was that religion Manichaeism. What was that?
Manichaeism. Leave your A out. Leave your A out, Mary. Not monoatheist, monotheist.
Monotheist.
Watch that A. Manichaeism. It's interesting, and actually with Zoroastrianism, which is related, that's a whole other story. I've been reading a really good book on that.
What is that?
Well, there is a sense in which there are two divine forces, right? Okay. So it seems like a dualism between good and evil.
That's what Manichaeism.
Yeah, that's right. But there is also a monotheistic way of doing this, where which we know in Christianity, where the evil is a fallen angel, right? Or the evil is the demiurge. Mm-hmm. from the Timaeus, which we were talking about last night, or the creator of the creator God of the Jews, right? Mm-hmm. But created in a way that made an error, and that's Gnosticism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's different ways of dealing with this problem of evil. Right, and so we can argue that, from a monotheistic point of view, from a Augustinian point of view, that Manichaeism, which he believed in and then he rejected, that Manichaeism is a dualism. Mm. But there might be some people who are Manichaeists who say, oh no, it's not. It's a monotheism. There was just like an error or a fallen angel or whatever else.
Over that.
Oh,
God, that's very
absolutely. Yeah, you got no idea.
If that's the case with Plato, and this is obviously very relevant to Plato, where does the logos fit into the superior being? Where all the
it's a really interesting question. I'm getting an echo.
Yeah.
Is everyone hearing that? Oh, it's gone now. Okay, it's a really interesting question. And it brings us back to the unwritten teachings stuff, because this comes up in the fragments that of the academic, the Old Academy. It's called the Old Academy. So after Plato died, you got the Old Academy. You got various stages of it until 88 BC, when the Romans demolished, sacked Athens, and then that was the end of the academy, and then there were new academies that built up. But so we've got these Old Academy fragments, and we've got this stuff from Aristotle and stuff. It's in this where you can find the logos, and also called the dyad, So it's called the dyad and the logos, and they're interchangeable in Christianity. Early Christianity is as well, as the means of the generation from the monad. Plato doesn't use the word monad. Well, it is there in Philebus. It does appear there, and as close as we get to it. But
So-
this stuff only appears in these accounts of the unwritten doctrines of Plato.
So was Jesus the Logos?
Yeah.
He was. He was. He
I
was.
believed it.
He's identified with the
personification
Christ,
of the Logos.
the Son, Father, Son,
Yeah.
was identified monad logos.
Yeah.
So we see that in the preface to John's Gospel, if you'd remember. So monad logos, or arche in John. So in the beginning, arche, in the principle was the logos. So you have the principle, and that has the logos, which is the means of all generation. So, and that relates to middle Platonism, but we can't see that in Plato very well, except maybe like a particular passage in Timaeus.
Because that was part of the secret academy. Is that what?
Yeah, the unwritten doctrines, the esoteric teachings in the academy. Yeah.
I should just mention, Bernie, you said when the Romans sacked Athens. Well, the astronomers say that if the Romans hadn't sacked Athens, that set science back 1,000 years. We would have already be traveling faster than light, and have already discovered traveled to other planets in the universe.
Oh, look, that's a lovely quote to end on, I think. As a hypothetical, we can stay around, but that's wonderful, Kula. Yeah, no, I just think, yeah, it was a real shame because there was this great continuity in the academy until then, and had really interesting results. But maybe it was a good idea because you had the diaspora, and then this knowledge spread to Alexandria and all these other places, which was good. So I just want to, because I know some people probably need to go, just wind up a bit here. Now, I hope to see some of you guys, because remember it said we will return Theodorus tomorrow and continue this discussion. And so tomorrow for us will be actually in 2 weeks, but in a month, on the 22nd of June, so more than a month. So really hope to see you guys, some of you guys there, but don't feel obliged. I don't need a big group for this. I really want to do it. I think Andrew really wants to do it. There's people in this group that really want to do it. So if you want to do it, do it. If you like doing philosophy, if you want to continue your inquiry and your self-reflection and relate that to what you're reading, then come along. It's going to be a lot of fun. I want to thank Jackie for helping me out with a few things in the emceeing sort of things around this. So thank you, Jackie, for doing that. And I also want to thank Andrew. People may not realize that because Andrew's actually, and I got together and selected the readings, and we've talked about each session prior to the session about how to present it. I've sort of gone to Andrew every time and cried on his shoulder and said, my God, how am I going to do this? It's all right. But maybe we should have read the memo first. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, everyone, for being so sporting about it all. It's been a wonderful experience for me. It's been hard work. I think it's been hard work for you, but I think we've got our rewards. So
great experience. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And Helen, Chronio Pola.
Happy name day, Helen.
Happy name day, yes. Chronio Pola.
Oh, okay.
Helen, are you coming on Sunday?
Say that again.
Are you coming on Sunday? Are you joining us on Sunday?
Sunday, yes. Yes.
Oh, fabulous. We'll have a drink to your good health, because of course
thanks.
Bernie is Constantino and Eleni, Constantine being the first emperor who took the Christian religion to the masses, the Roman masses, and his mother Helena. So we
so it's your name day today. Okay.
Anybody?
Okay.
21st, on the 21st.
This week.
25th.
Oh, okay. So I hope to see a lot of you at Mary's, and yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you.
And
all.
did you tell everyone, Bernie, about your link, the link to the lecture?